Well, hello, everybody. I've got a very special guest in this episode. I've got Deb from the Omnivorous Reader. And Deb, you're in Australia, that's correct?
I'm in Australia. I'm on the Gold Coast, so we're in the middle of summer.
Nice. Yeah, and I found your channel a long time ago. I can't even remember how. We read a lot of the same books. You definitely read a lot more outside of science fiction and fantasy, which I like. I think we've read a lot of the same nonfiction books as well. So yeah, happy
Yeah,
to. Oh, go ahead.
sorry, I felt your channel is one of the first ones that was recommended to me. So I've been following you for probably as long as I've discovered BookTube.
All right.
Very happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you on. And as a lot of people know, I'm reading through this list that Easton Press put together called the Masterpieces of Science Fiction. And I've had a few people on, and it's been a lot of fun. And glad to have Deb on. And we picked a classic, or Deb picked this one out. I had a bunch that I was going to be reading, and so we're going to be discussing Ringworld. And Deb's got the Del Rey copy, it looks like there, huh? Yeah, have you seen this cover from the book club edition?
I've seen it on other people's channels, and it looks really, really fancy. It's a hardcover, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just an older book club one, but I thought it would be really good when we talk about some of the aliens because, most of the covers kind of just show the depiction of the ring, and
Yep.
this one gives you a little idea of what the aliens look like as well.
Which is pretty wild.
Yeah. And
Mm.
so first off, I guess I'll just say this, I think this book was came out in like 1970, I believe, right?
Yep.
And yeah, 1970. It won the Hugo, the Nebula, and the Locus Award. So it kind of splashed onto the scene. Larry Niven. We don't have to go into a lot of detail with him, but he um, he kind of brings a mixture of hard science, I think some adventure, and then I've known this a lot that he writes aliens really well. And after reading this one, I think I could probably agree with that one too.
Yep,
And
I'd say all of that.
yeah,
I'll add in, sorry,
go
I'll
ahead.
jump in. I think he does really good settings. This is the second Niven I've read this year. The other one was Dream Park, and both of them have really elaborate settings and very good group dynamics because I think you see a lot in books you've got a main protagonist, but the secondary characters aren't often that much to the front. So you've got one character, whereas Niven seems to be able to really bring together a group dynamic, have a number of characters play off each other, and expand the world that way.
Yeah, the only other Niven book I've read is Lucifer's Hammer that he co-wrote with Jerry Purnell. And I read that a long time ago. It's more of just an apocalyptic story. There's no aliens or anything like that. It was well written. It's definitely like a 70s story, though.
Ah,
Everything is
okay.
very 70s with it. But yeah, I mean, he was kind of, I feel like a one of my authors on my list of shame. And as far as all the really, really classic science fiction books, this is one that I hadn't read before, so it was all brand new to me. So, had you read this one before?
Yes, I am something like 99% certain that I did read it, but I think I read it so long ago. I was a teenager at the time. And I honestly can't say that I remembered much while I was reading it, even. I think there were a couple of scenes, one early in the book when Louis Wu meets the puppeteer for the first time. I remembered that because Pearson's puppeteers as aliens are so wild. And there were a couple of other small fragments throughout the book that rang a very faint bell, but I wouldn't have been able to remember a single thing unless I'd have reread it. So it
So it
was
was
like new.
almost new to you then, huh?
Mm, yes.
Yeah. So do you want to start off with the premise, or I can do it either way?
You do the premise. You go
Okay.
ahead.
So in the very beginning, we're introduced to our main character, Lewis, and he's like 200 years old. very complacent. He's been taking, I think it's called booster spice, which is a drug that helps longevity. And he he gets approached by one of these Pearson's puppeteers, which is this alien depicted right here. It's got three legs and two heads. And this alien race, humanity has come across quite a few different alien races. And these puppeteers, they sent out this one in particular. His name is Nesser or Nessus, I think. And he is a little bit braver than the normal puppeteer. They're very cowardly in a way. They don't like to interact with other alien species. And so he's sent out to try to assemble this team because as they're fleeing the galactic center from this major event that's happened, they saw this ring out in space and it looked like an unnatural artifact, very large in size, and they're kind of curious and worried about it. And so he assembles this team. He gets Lewis on board because Lewis is kind of an adventurer and he had experience with discovering an alien race. And so they think he might have something to offer. And then they go into a bar and seek the help of one of these characters. They're a Kazin, and this one's name is Speaker to Animals. They call him Speaker all the time. And they're very brave and they will go into any situation and they're fierce in at times if they need to be. So they bring him along. And then there was a fourth person that they wanted to bring, and this happened to be another human, someone that Lewis, our main character, was kind of involved with. And she was only 20 years old, I think, and she had some special ability we'll talk about probably in a little bit later in the book. So it's kind of the setup. They assemble a team. They kind of get them to go along with this because these puppeteers had this advanced spacecraft that could travel faster than anything else that had been known at the time. And they say, if you go along with this, we'll give you either the plans or give you one of these ships for your race. And so after a bit, they kind of assemble this team and head out into space to go check out this big artifact, which is known as the Ringworld. So, did I miss anything or anything you want to add?
It's interesting how two people can read the same thing, and everything you said is true. A few things that struck me about this introduction is that this takes up fully a third of the book. So you're a third of the way through the book before you even approach the ring. And because Nessus keeps the rest of his team in ignorance along the way, we actually discover things very organically along that third of the book in the same way that they do. So yeah, I think that's a fair introduction.
Yeah,
And we
Niven.
also get to see them bonding together.
Yeah, Niven does a good job of kind of giving you the information slowly. Even,
Yes.
I at times it felt a little clunky, but you're just not even sure what he's talking about at first, and he kind of passes it by, and then a, maybe a paragraph or two later, it kind of comes back out. He doesn't leave you in the dark too much because one thing I guess I could mention too is this puppeteer here. He's very worried about this Kazin. This it's kind of like a cat-like creature, I guess you would call him. And so he has this thing called a tasp, I believe it is, and he can inflict like this great pleasure into somebody with it. And it's very interesting how this alien race, these Kazin, they don't want this pleasure brought forth because they feel like, they would be addicted to it almost in a way, or there's this kind of weird dynamic.
I think the thing with the task is that it causes pleasure, not pain, like you said. But it seems to me that everyone in the story knows that repeated um, tasping, is that a word?
Yeah.
Is almost instantly addictive. So our speaker mentions it at one point, but Louis does too. And later on, we get the clear notion that if it gets used on you too often or too much, or and apparently they can choose how much of a grade of pleasure it inspires, eventually it will become addictive to the point where you become enslaved to it or to
Yeah.
the individual who's carrying it. So that is a pretty intimidating non-weapon, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the puppeteer kind of uses this throughout the story at times on different people as well. And it's a pretty interesting concept. I did really think of it as like an instant drug dose or something, that just floods this person with pleasure, this creature, whatever it is. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
that addictive quality that they have fear of. They don't want to be addicted by this thing. So then we
Oh,
start. Do you want to talk about anything else before we get to the ring?
the first third of the book, once again, still surprised how long it took to get through that introduction, like one third of the book. I actually found myself, you said it was clunky, and I know a few other people have said that as well. I was actually really, really engrossed by it. I thought it was so good that I didn't even mind that it was taking so long to get to the ring. I loved Niven's foreseeing of the future because the first page is where we meet Louis Wu, and it's his 200th birthday, and he's transporting through the world against the sun so that he can make his birthday last longer. So we see him transporting from his party to Beirut to Budapest next, just going along to make his birthday last. And as he goes, he actually becomes more and more depressed because he sees the world as having become almost the same. Wherever he goes, it's the same shops, it's the same people. Fashions go all over the world at once. And so we end up with this very well structured background story, background world before we get to the ring. And then we
Hmm.
get to the ring.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think as a storyteller, I think he did good. Some of the clunkiness maybe came from just the almost grammar or the some of it didn't flow perfectly like some of these, wordsmith authors. But I mean, he is a great author. I think he's a fantastic author, but um there was just some of that. And I wouldn't even really say clunky too much as a negative because I was engrossed the whole way through the book. The way he developed the characters, the plot, kept you intrigued the whole way through, pretty much.
yeah, okay. Now I see what you mean by clunky. I agree. He isn't someone, you're not hanging on every single word. You're not rereading a sentence for the beauty of it very often. But yeah, good crafting, not poetry.
Yeah, yeah. But I know there are some people that criticize his writing a little bit more. I think it's fine, especially for something written in the 70s and what he was doing. Some of this was pretty groundbreaking. What was one thing that I found that was interesting when you talked about in the beginning the character Lewis jumping ahead of the sun so he could keep the his birthday going and going. Funny little thing, I guess when he first wrote that, he had him going eastward by accident, and it made it through until I think he revised it maybe after the first printing of the first paperback even. So I think there's versions of the book where that's he's going the wrong way.
I read an interview where he said the first edition is the one with the mistakes, so that's the most valuable.
Yeah.
And yeah, I heard that one as well. And I also heard that he makes a lot of technical mistakes. I wouldn't be able to pick up if he's got his physics wrong or his maths wrong. But apparently, he made enough mistakes and got enough criticism that the second book in this series, Engineers of Ringworld Engineers, whichever
Hmm.
one it is, apparently that book came out to address some of those actual critiques. So that was interesting.
Yeah, and I guess yeah, getting into the as we get into the actual ring world, it's it's science fiction. It doesn't, to me, everything doesn't have to be completely grounded into fact. I think it's plausible enough, but I think it kind of shows he did a good enough job that he had like physicists and people really criticizing this to see if this thing would actually work. And yeah, I guess it's unstable the way he envisions it, and he gives pretty much all the dimensions, the mass, the rotation of this thing, the star it's going around. So there was enough science there that people could actually analyze it. So I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, I love that about old classic sci-fi. They come up with concepts based on what they know, then other people examine it. And yeah, that's really dynamic. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we get to the ring world. And just getting to the ring world was really good because we had our four protagonists in this ship that belonged to the puppeteers. And they're coming up on this immense structure and they're trying to figure out how to land. I really enjoyed that part as well because you're looking at they fly underneath it and they can see it like you'd see a base relief map. They can
Yeah.
see the deeper bits that would be oceans and the higher bits that would be mountains, and they're trying to think how can they land on it. And his the physics that he's got indicate that they can't land on the surface. They have to come up from the side. They see all these things that they think are docking mechanisms, but then all inactive. And is it a spoiler to say that as they're coming up on the ring, they are expecting people to be contactable, that they're trying to contact them? Is that a spoiler?
I don't think so. I don't think for this one. Yeah, you don't know. I guess coming up to the ring, they don't know if this thing is inhabited or not. I think I can't remember if they were trying to get signals or some sort of communication, but everything seemed dark. And so I think they expected it to be sort of vacant. Um, but the even the description of it is pretty. I'll give a quick description. So it's a sun a little smaller than our sun. The actual ring, and I do have this paperback too that kind of gives you a little bit of a description. That the one you have is the closest. There's a major error with what you can see in here. And
Yes.
even the bottom, like what you're talking about, this is not how it was described in the book. But the actual ring is about the size of Earth's orbit around the sun. And the ring is 1 million miles wide. It's got walls that go up 1,000 miles on each side, and it's open to space, and it spins at I think around 700,000 miles per second. It's rotating, and that's with centripetal force. That's keeping everything stuck to the ring. So it's
Yep.
like almost the complete opposite of being on a globe. And it's I think the equivalent, the surface area of the inside of the ring is like 3 million Earths if you laid out the Earth. So it's just like this incredible artifact. It's obviously not natural. It's got these sunshades or these shadow squares that kind of provide some day and night that's shown on yours. And and then yeah, so there's all this stuff going on with just the immensity of this thing and how fast it's spinning. So they have to do a lot of figuring out how to even approach this thing. And yeah, that's where we get to some of the derelict tech that was kind of used to dock some of these ships that doesn't seem to be working, right?
So what I remember, or what the impression I got, was that the puppeteers do very much expect to find an advanced culture on it, and that they're quite scared of that culture. And the concept is that they've evolved physics, but they've evolved physics different to ours. So they don't seem to have the same drives that the puppeteers and by extension the rest of the aliens that humans have encountered have. But they've got their own very unique um, science, and the puppeteers are quite scared of them and what they might do. But then the puppeteers, we're told, are scared of everything, so that's fine. As the ship is actually approaching, there's quite a few scenes though where Speaker is trying to contact the denizens of the ring, and he's trying with every method at his disposal. So at that point, they do still think that there might be someone there who will talk to them. And even when Speaker is completely frustrated and angry and wants to go away and go to sleep, um, Nessus is telling him to keep on trying until he just finally refuses to try anymore. So,
Hmm.
so there we are, hanging in space with them, not knowing what's going to happen next.
Yeah, they're kind of investigating this thing from the outside, like you mentioned. They can see the underside of it and like the relief of what's going on the sun-facing side of it. They find these docks that it looks like these ships are long abandoned, and there was like a series of rings that the ships would fly through to either speed them up or slow them down so they could keep up with the spin of the ring. And that doesn't seem to be working. And so they end up kind of going to investigate those shadow squares. And that's when kind of everything kind of starts going haywire for them or
And that is, you can't really go into that part too much because that is a spoiler. What happens to them when they're investigating these shades and stuff ties into the later plot. But I love the idea of having these squares floating between you and the sun to provide that night daylight balance that so many types of ecology need, as we discover when we meet the surface, which they do rather suddenly.
hmm. Yeah, and then it,
Um,
it kind of becomes an adventure story for a while once they kind of crash land in a way and need to figure out what's going on. And this is where I guess we could get into spoilers. It is I guess maybe the about halfway point you get to where they're on the surface of this ring. And then it takes quite a while for kind of the adventure side of the story as they're investigating what's left of whatever cultures or society was on this ring.
and this part, which is the part that I thought I was going to like the best, while I enjoyed the reading, it was a mild enjoyment. It felt like an adventure that wasn't actually that adventurous. You had these occasional big things happening, like the sunflowers. I really like the sunflowers a bit. Um, but overall, it seemed like this mild quest, and we know that there's consequences to the outcome of this quest, or where they end up, or who they find. But the consequences never really seem that imminent or that strong to me. It just seems like you're following along where they're going. So that was interesting pacing. And I've seen a few people criticize it as not holding their attention or being boring. And while I don't feel that way about it myself at all, I can see why someone who's more geared up for a higher energy adventure might see that about the investigation of the ring. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I've read a few books recently where it's such a big concept, and when the character finally gets there, you know the author could have went anywhere with this. They had the sky was the limit. That's the type of concept this is. And another one that really comes to mind was Frederick Pohl's Gateway. Now, I love both of these books, but both of them had sky's the limit. They could do anything with it. And then they kind of, I wouldn't say play it safe, but they go a route that's not as exciting as it could have been, but it's what we get, I guess.
And I guess if they were being written in the 2020s, what you'd end up with is a series. You'd have Ringworld, then you'd have one person going off to investigate the oceans. And I've just got to say right now, when they're describing the ring, they describe these two immense oceans on two opposite sides of it, each one of them as large as the entire planet Earth. And that's where I wanted them to get go. I knew they wouldn't. They kept going, go investigate. There's oceans. There's going to be whales. There's going to be dinosaurs. There's going to be stuff, and they never went there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and then
got a
this
whole
thing,
heap of questions.
yeah. So I mean, I don't mind that much. I could see how and if you were reading this in 1970, it was still probably completely mind-blowing. Same with Gateway when that came out. Mind-blowing stuff, but someone now reading it, I think that's some of the criticism you see is the sky was the limit and they kind of settled for something else. It doesn't bother me at all. It did slow down a little bit during that kind of adventure phase, but there was enough mystery still throughout that I was still invested the whole way through that.
Absolutely. And the thing is, because I read a lot of older stuff, the pacing doesn't seem that unfamiliar to me. And I'm perfectly happy when I put down the book to go away and start investigating in my own head, imagining what's in those oceans or imagining what's on the other side of the mountains or what it would be like if that's gone on a different tangent. It just engages my imagination and I enjoyed that. So
Yeah, I'm the same way. Yeah. And so once they're on this massive ring, it's 3 million times the size of the Earth. And there was some things that happened that they just happened to stumble across because even just getting to like the edge of the ring was going to take them vast amounts of time to travel. This is just the scale of this thing is it's hard to even fathom how big this thing is. And they just happened to stumble across some things, but there's some coincidence or convenience, but Niven did a really good job to write that into the story.
really did. He did an excellent job.
And
Um,
oh, go ahead.
no, go on, go on.
I was just gonna say, it's not anything um, you really even have to spoil, but this idea of luck or coming across something or crashing in the right area, he actually put it into the plot. And when you really think about it, and humanity going forward, however many generations, that luck could be something real at some point, maybe, or I don't know. He just wrote it really well into it.
That's actually a concept that Niven has played with a lot of times, as I understand it. The idea of luck as being inheritable. Can I spoiler where this luck comes from now, by the way? Are
Sure,
we
I
far
think
enough here?
we're far enough in here. There might be some
Okay.
mild spoilers.
Okay, so Tila Brown as a character, who I know has annoyed many people who didn't feel that women were being treated carefully there. Tila Brown is a lucky person. She has inherited luck. Um, so in this world of the future, it's so populated, the human world, that people are allowed one child, but some people can win a lottery and gives them the option to have another child. And anyone who, at the end of a certain number of generations who've repeatedly won this lottery, are assumed to have a higher luck quota. And so Tila Brown is assumed to have a much higher luck quota. And this luck is an inheritable feature, like, I don't know, color of your eyes or something. That's a concept that Niven plays with a lot, apparently. He likes the idea of things that we don't think of as inheritable being inherited. And in the 70s, it was a perfectly reasonable assumption, really. We were only just learning about genetics and inheritance. DNA had only been discovered, like, what, a couple of decades before it. It was all brand new and exciting in this explosion of options. So, inheritable luck.
Yeah, and he writes it so well into the story. These puppeteers are the ones who kind of figured this out, and they were seeking someone. There was about 1,000 candidates, I think, if I remember right, and it was kind of convenient that our main character was dating this girl, so she came aboard. But the way he even wrote it in, where they're second guessing everything, like she must have been, if this is an ill mission, then she was unlucky to been chosen to go on the mission. So it's got to be a lucky mission, like every facet of the mission and then what happens when they kind of get stranded, it plays into the whole thing. And then, like I said, there was a convenience that one area on this ring that they needed to get to happened to be sort of close from where they crash, but it's really
Like they crashed.
yeah,
So
it's explained through her ability to have luck. So
actually, yes, Niven did an excellent job with that because a lot of books, if you've got a book like this, you have to have the narrative has to follow a certain sequence of events, and making the events work often requires some serious juggling how to make them realistic and working. And I can't see how anyone would have done this better. This was
yeah.
really well done.
Yeah, and I can say, oh well, they just needed to move the plot along, and sure enough, this thing that they needed happened to be right there if I'm reading, other stories. But once I once that dawned on me, because I thought that's what was happening here was just they conveniently crashed, but then it started dawning on me, well, that's part of her luck, right? Everything.
Yes, and I love the way they discuss it too. You've got these long discussions between Nessus and Speaker, at least, and possibly Louis as well. I can't remember about maybe she doesn't have luck. Maybe we just thought she had luck because if she had luck, she wouldn't have been chosen. She wouldn't have been available to go on this mission, and we've crashed and we're marooned on this ring, and we can't find the technology to go anywhere else. So she must be unlucky. But if she's unlucky, why did this other thing happen? And they're tying themselves up in these Gordian knots over whether her luck is real or not, or bad or not.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's
like a
actually
Lux paradox.
very, yes. And I actually really enjoyed all those sequences of
Yeah.
watching our characters overthinking things.
Yeah, that was really clever. I liked that part of it. And it took me a bit to figure that out. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, this is genius, Like, I mean, people were writing about psionics and all these other things. So like you said, we didn't know if luck was something. We still probably don't know, but
No,
I don't think I've read a story where that was used as a trait of humanity, kind of.
no, I feel like Fritz Lieber in the Lieber, I meant to say Lieber, aren't I? Fritz Leiber in the Green Millennium has luck as an actual characteristic, but certainly not in a similar way to this and not associated so much with humans.
Yeah.
So, no, I
Yeah.
can't think of any other one.
Yeah, so
Right.
I overall just I really enjoyed this one. It makes me really want to go read some more in his known space because I mean there were so many other ideas, even the puppeteers, they have a fleet of worlds. I'll just leave it at that. He wrote a book called Fleet of Worlds, and I'm sure that goes into that. And then the Man and Kazin Wars that was mentioned in this, he wrote a whole series of books with some other authors going over the whole Man Kazin Wars. Um, there's a lot that I'm very interested in his known space universe.
I the Man Kazin Wars, that was an interesting thing too, because when we first meet the Kazin and Speaker to Animals comes along and sort of joins the party, we don't really know that much about them except that they're antagonistic to humans and there have been wars in the past. And then as the mission continues, we learn more and more about that history. And by the time we actually hit the crash into the ring, as it were, um, we know enough to make it a really interesting dynamic between Speaker and Louis Wu and Nessus. So that was really interesting. Like I said, I've seen a number of criticisms of this book as being misogynistic. And I happen to disagree. And I'd like to make a couple of comments about it. Now, I can see why a modern author, especially a young woman who's used to modern writing, would feel that way about this book. And it comes down to a theme of mine that I'm constantly belaboring is that you have to read a book for the era it was written in. So if you're reading a book from 1950, you can't expect it to have 2020's attitudes or society. Same with 1970. So if you go back and look at 1970 and see the state of society and their attitudes to women, far from being misogynistic, I think it was way ahead of its time. Now, I think Larry Niven in general writes really good, interesting women characters, and they're not two dimensional. And in this book, when I started it, I remember being a little bit surprised at his choice of Tila Brown, because Tila Brown, when we first meet her, is a very young, superficially stupid woman, because Louis Wu makes comments to her and she can't even follow what he's talking about. And he just takes that to mean that she's really, really young, exceptionally naive. And we later find out that no, she's actually a very intelligent character, but her life experience has been slanted by her luck in such a way that her learning ability has been different to other people. So I think that Tila Brown actually evolves as a really interesting character and a very strong one with its own character arc and story development, I suppose, that is really unique. And I would argue with anyone who calls it misogynistic. However, she is used as a character in a way that can be seen as misogynistic at times because she is the one in this crew that doesn't know much about science. So a lot of science books, rather than doing an info dump, will have one character to whom the other characters need to explain the physics or the maths or what something is. And I, the reader, am also that character because I know what a Dyson sphere is, but only just. I needed a lot of these characters, a lot of this information explained, and Tila Brown was there to be that gateway instead of an info dump.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that. I can also see why, from a misogynistic point of view, when Tila Brown's story arc changes a little bit, around about chapter 18, her whole arc changes. And then we once again get a character who's our gateway for knowledge, and once again it's a woman. So that's a tiny little bit iffish. And that second character, who I'm not going to spoil her at least, I've seen her objected to as well because she was probably a professional sex worker.
Mm-hmm.
1970. That isn't misogynistic for 1970. That is way ahead of its time because she's clearly this extremely well-educated university PhD graduate in physical sciences, and I just disagree with that as misogynistic. So
Yeah, and
that's what I
out of all that was very well put. Out of all of the characters, like by the time you get to the end of this story, this novel, the one character I wanted to know what happens to next is Tila. The other ones, I mean, you can kind of guess and you kind of know, but it's like she's got a really great character arc she went through. She had a really good ending, and I'm very curious. I mean, I eventually do want to read some of the sequels. I don't know if she obviously has to come back in them, I would say, but maybe not. I don't know.
I'd be very disappointed if she didn't. And like you, I want to read more from this series. There's so many questions that, like, even the Pearson's puppeteers, that name is so specific. I don't remember anywhere in the book telling us why they're Pearson's puppeteers in particular. So what's the story with Pearson and how were they discovered in the first place? I've got no idea.
Yeah, and then there was another alien race described that is almost like energy that I was really like I want to know more about them. There's websites where you can go through and just like read in the publication order. But he was writing short stories before he wrote Ringworld that happened in this same universe. But there's also some websites out there. I think one's on Larry Niven's website, and they give you some kind of reading order. A lot of people say start with Ringworld because it gets you hooked into this. It teases you with a lot of these concepts and aliens. But
I'm absolutely.
I'm gonna go back and kind of to some of the very first short stories he wrote, I think, and start reading through until I catch back up to Ringworld and then maybe get into the sequels. I've heard mixed things about some of the sequels, but
Me too. I've had them actively unrecommended, in fact. But yes, I think when you read Ringworld, it's quite clear that he's got history with these characters and these events and all of this. And I really want to see more of that. So I think short stories from before it are probably the way to go. When I was trying to read about the other novels he had in that world, and I've forgotten the name of the world, Known Universe.
known space. Known
I
space.
couldn't see any indication of things written before Ringworld. They all seem to be after. So
Yeah, there was some short stories and even one novel. I think The World of Paths was, I think that's a novel. But yeah, on his website, or there's other places. And one thing that I noticed too, that people, when they read, because there's like four Ringworld books, but they say you really need to read a book called Protector at a certain time. I forget where to read it at, but it's all online somewhere. And I guess that really sets up some of the later novels. I don't know. I think there's some things that people hate about those that I don't think they would get over. I heard Matt talking about it kind of turning into these giant orgies or something really bizarre, but um, yeah,
that
I mean,
is the side effect of 1970s writing. I've got to say, 60s and 70s, it happened.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I am keen. I do have a couple of other Larry Nivens. I've managed to pick up Moat and God's Eye that he wrote with Cornell, and I do want to read that next year. But I've got another one in the Dream Park, so I think I'd probably go for those first, and then go looking for more of the known universe, known worlds,
Known space.
known space.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to be reading Moat and God's Eye soon. I hear that that's one, and he co-wrote that with Jerry Purnell, but apparently they really wrote these aliens really well. So I'm excited to read that one soon. And then, yeah, I'm going to start going through some of these known space ones. So I had a lot of fun with this, though. It was definitely
It was
one of the,
great to read.
yeah, it was one of the classics on my list of shames, that have won all these awards and people are still talking about to this day, really.
Well, they should. I mean, I can see a lot of criticisms for it, and I totally get a lot of them. But considering when it was written and how mind blowing its concepts are and how far reaching its influences, have you ever read any Terry Pratchett?
Yeah, I've read a couple in the Discworld
The
series.
Discworld is great, but my favorite Pratchett I have prepared here actually is Strata. And
Okay.
Strata isn't in the Discworld series, it's about a future universe where they create planets. And they don't have booster spice like they do in Ringworld, but they have a way of lengthening their life as well. And Pratchett apparently wrote that as partly a satire and partly a piss take and a little bit of a tribute to Ringworld. And Niven apparently read it and loved it as well. So, and he's affected. I've got gamer friends who play Halo, and that was apparently at least partly based on Ringworld. And Ian M. Banks, I think one of his is based on Ringworld as well. So it's this massively far-reaching book.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it was one of the first concepts of some artificial, massive, celestial object or something. Because I don't know if you've read Rendezvous with Rama, Arthur C. Clarke. That's another
Great
one,
book.
but that came out after this, if I remember correctly. So,
I'm pretty sure that there've been Dyson spheres in space, but I have heard them called the Big Dumb Object books,
hmm
and everyone it's a bit unfair title perhaps, but I have heard Rendezvous with Rama and Ringworld as two of the flagships of that genre. So yeah,
yeah,
really glad I read it, reread it, whatever.
yeah.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on and doing this with me. Glad it spurred me to read this. Might be in my top 10 this year. I'm still trying to figure that out, but I came in really strong at the end here.
I'm really glad that the whole idea of a buddy read is a great idea, and I might not have gotten to Ringworld for months otherwise. So yeah, it's worked really well for me too.
All
Mm.
right. Well, let me know if you
Okay,
ever want to do this again, and it's been a
sure,
blast. So,
anytime.
all right. Well,
Mm.
thanks.
Okay. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.